Hello, and welcome to the Powder Room, where we discover the message within our messes. I am your host, Ivy Ashley. In today's episode titled Confronting Daddy Issues, we're continuing our discussion by taking you deeper into my personal journey towards healing and wholeness. But before I get started, I must take a pause and say Happy Father's Day to all the amazing men who do exactly what you are supposed to do as fathers by showing up consistently and willingly. I salute you today, my kings. And and it's unfortunate that I have to say this to all the women who love to chant, I'm the mother and the father, you sound crazy. Listen, my mom was an amazing mother, but in all her awesomeness, she could never be a man or a father. She may have played two roles, but she could only fulfill one. So let's not get it confused. Sunday, June 15th, is about the men, the fathers, the goddaddies, the uncles, the cousins, the mentor, etc. It's not about you. Okay? All right. As you can tell, I am on one already. So let me get started into this discussion today. So last week, we dealt with uncovering daddy issues. So if you have not listened to that episode, please go back and take a listen because each one of these truly build upon the other. And I don't want you to miss any of these nuggets that I'm sharing in this series. Now, the truth about uncovering. So let's go back there for just a little second. So when we uncover daddy issues, that means that we are in a space where we're acknowledging and we have an awareness. So there is a recognition that there are certain actions, certain behaviors, and certain thoughts that are a direct result of having an absent or inconsistent father. So you're just at a space where you recognize, okay, these things aren't right. And so I need to take a closer look. Now, with confrontation, confronting means that we're ready to deal with it now. We've sat in acknowledgement, we've set in awareness. Now it's time to do something about it. Now it's time to deal with the actions, the behaviors, and the thoughts. And I truly believe that the readiness to confront comes from realizing the impact and having the desire to do things differently. Now, I will tell you that both of these phases take time because emotional and mental healing is a process, y'all. It is truly a process. And I will tell you that for me, I set an awareness and acknowledgement probably for a good, oh goodness, 10, 15 plus years. And I recognize while preparing this today that I sat in awareness for too long because I did not have the tools to move toward confrontation. And so I believe these discussions are so important because if I could get you to the place where you deal with your stuff much earlier, you will not have to experience some of the things that I've had to experience or make some of the choices that I made or make some of the mistakes that I made, all because I didn't confront my daddy issues sooner. So while both of these take time, while uncovering takes time, while confronting takes time, it should not take a lifetime. It does require truth and is only effective when we are ready to be honest. Well, speaking of truth, I hope you guys have your tea kettles ready because I'm about to pour my own tea. So, in last week's episode, I began to talk about some defining moments in my childhood and adulthood that helped me realize the impact of daddy issues in my life. So the first one I mentioned, but I really didn't go into any detail about it, was realizing I was dating my dad. And that was actually the final defining moment. So I realized that, the men that I dated had the same characteristics in my dad that I absolutely hated. So I was dating inconsistency. I was dating abandonment. I was dating rejection. I was dating empty promises. I was dating men who their word meant nothing. I was dating men who made me feel unworthy. I was dating men who made me feel unlovable. So, in essence, I was dating my dad. And I often hear people say, and maybe even in times past, I said it myself, how can someone make you feel something you are not? Well, let me answer that for you. So I had very low self-esteem and self-confidence, and I've mentioned that, a couple times on this podcast. So I often look to the men in my life for validation and also acceptance. And that is what I could not get from my dad. I look for in the men who I dated. However, what I know now is when I was seeking for acceptance and validation outside of myself, I was actually setting myself up for failure. I was setting myself up for disaster because validation and acceptance has to come from within. So when I learned to value myself, that is when others began to treat me as valuable. Other people would emulate the behavior that you exhibit. Let's not forget that. So never look for validation, never look for acceptance outside of yourself. And I will also say outside of your relationship with God, because it's not going to end well. Let's just put it that way. So that was the first thing, realizing I was dating my dad. Now, the very first realization came when I was in my late teens. I had just arrived at FAMU. I transferred from community college back in 1994. And I had the realization that my broken relationship with my father was not my fault. So prior to me leaving to go to school, my daddy had informed me that his brother was a professor in the School of Business and Industry at FAMU. And I had never met this man in my life, and I was 19, 20 at the time. When I was born, my uncle was away at college. So, he was already away from the area when I came into the world, and I don't believe he ever came back to where they were born and raised once he went off to school. And so after a few days, my first week on campus, I was back and forth, to this man's office trying to catch up with him. And so one day I finally walked into his office and caught him. And I said, "Hi, Dr. Ashley. I am your niece, Ivy Ashley." And he was like, "Oh my God." And he started laughing and he hugged me, really, really, really tight. And it was, very good. I mean, he treated me like he had known me all my life. So I sat in his office and we just began to talk and, just catch up, So in the midst of this conversation, he makes the statement that, yeah, when I was in school, your dad and his wife, they came to my graduation and he told me the year that it was, and I don't remember. Actually, I think it was, the year I was born, if I'm not mistaken. And I was like, no, it couldn't have been that year because, my dad and my mom were together that year. And so he was like, no, I'm pretty sure, of the year that I graduated. And after more conversation, I realized that at the time of my birth, my father was married. And so I didn't know what to do with that information. And so I went back to my apartment, called my mom, who was a nurse at the time, and she was busy with patients, so she couldn't, talk to me. So I ended up calling the house. My sister answered the phone, and I was like, "Hey, do you know anything about this?" And she, said, just so matter of fact, "Oh, yeah, blah, blah, blah." And I was like, "What?" And I immediately got upset and I started crying. And she was like, "Well, what's wrong with you? What's the problem?" And I hung up on her because she could not understand my plight at the time because it was like 19 years worth of blame just came over me in that moment, knowing that there was a whole other stimulus that existed that I had no knowledge of. I had, no awareness of growing up. That was really the reason why there was a breakdown in the relationship with my father growing up. This is why at the age of 8 or 9 that he just disappeared into thin air because he had a whole nother family and I was not included. So just realizing all the time that I spent thinking things were my fault, thinking that there was something that I did that made him not want to come around, thinking that if I do well in this, or if I, perform this way, that there was something that I could do. There was an adjustment that I could make to reconcile the relationship that I longed for so long. So I did not know what to do with this information. I was confused. I was hurt. I was angry. I was a myriad of things. And so when my mom found out why I called, she immediately called me and said, "I'm on my way." So after she got off of work that day, She spent no time getting in a car, driving to school, and sitting with me. We went to dinner, checked into a hotel, and she talked to me and, told me that, she was not aware, that my father was married at the time. He actually didn't get married until after she became pregnant, with me. And the details around, why he got married and what happened, that's not my story to tell. That's hers. And she's no longer, with us. So, that will go to her in her grave. But just know that there was a whole lot of dishonesty, going on in the relationship between my father and my mother. So you can understand why, I had so many emotions, and initially I wanted nothing to do, with my father. I was resistant to proceeding with any type of relationship with him at the time. There was even some shame there, some confusion that surfaced because I could not make sense that this man that I had placed on a pedestal was not perfect. I will say that confrontation for me occurred in two parts. The first one, I felt like I had to confront my dad. And I'm going to tell you up front, it was not productive at all. For me, confrontation included telling my dad about what he did and what he did not do, but I never told him how his actions impacted me. And at this point, I'm not sure it would have even made a difference. These conversations were just filled with so much emotion. They were filled with so much anger. They were filled with so much blame. And they always ended with him making promises that he had no intentions on living up to. And I really feel like, it was his way of, shutting me up, basically. There was even one time that, let me say it this way. So when I was in, I would say my late 20s, it was a few years after I had accepted my call to ministry, and I wanted to do a singles conference. I was living in Dallas at the time, and I wanted to hold a singles conference in my hometown of Jacksonville, Florida. So I got together a few of my friends from Bible college, and we did this conference. And so I had told my dad that I was going to be in town, for the weekend, but I wasn't quite sure that I would be available, to come and see him. But he was more than welcome to, come to the conference. So I got into town like on a Thursday or maybe even a Wednesday, on a Wednesday because the conference started on Thursday. And so went to the conference on Thursday, and I don't even know if I called him and let him know I was in town, but he knew the dates that I would be there. And then had the conference on Friday. And then we had like a little gathering at my sister's house where, they fed us and we were just talking and having a good time. And I received a call probably around, I would say 10 o'clock, saying that my dad was in the ICU. So, of course, I rushed, to the hospital and I was able to see him and they had him heavily sedated or he may have been unconscious. He was unconscious. And so and he was, tied up to a whole bunch of machines and things like that. So me and, one of my friends went and saw him and prayed for him. And, I was, definitely concerned and I really couldn't, go on with the conference. I did go on with the conference. I just didn't speak Saturday morning like I was supposed to because I was consumed and overwhelmed. And then I went to see him on a Saturday afternoon, evening, and he was doing much better and, was appeared to be on the mends. Then I went to see him again on Sunday. And do you know, guys, that when I talked to my dad, he was up and talking, at this point. He blamed me for him being in the hospital. He said it was my fault that he ended up in the hospital because I didn't come and see him. What is that to tell your child? I am not responsible for your medical issues, and I won't go into detail about, what his issues were. I think I actually went into, some detail with my book. So buy the book, Daddy Issues, Love Lessons and Healing from Toxic Relationships, if you want to find more about that story. But I was just so heartbroken that, he said those words to me. And so there were a whole lot of years both of us spent pointing the finger at each other, and ultimately none of the words said made, our relationship any better. But when I turned 40, I don't know what happens, when you turn 40. And for those of you who, haven't turned 40 yet, wait on it because I'm gonna tell you two things happen when you turn 40. First of all, you start analyzing at everything. It's like you get to this pivotal moment, of your life and you look at, what you've accomplished. You look at, things you have yet to accomplish, things you want to do. You look at all these things that have occurred in your life at this point, and you want to make all the necessary adjustments because it's like you realize, hey, I'm 40 now. I'm an adult for real, and there are certain things in my life that should not fly at this point. So you really start, kind of, making adjustments, at 40. The second thing that happens, you start not caring. And what I mean by that, it's like sweating the small stuff, the insignificant things. It's like you have very low tolerance for nonsense. Oh my God. And I'm telling you, it gets worse at 50. It's like this switch is flipped on, and it's just like, I don't have time to be wasting time. And so that is where I was when I was 40. And because I had arrived at that place, and I started looking at all of my relationships and seeing, girl, If you don't make a change, your, romantic life is going to hell in a handbasket. Do y'all remember Whoopi Goldberg's character in Ghost? Her name was Oda Mae, I believe. And when she realized the truth behind Sam or Patrick Swayze's character, murder, that she went to Demi Moore and told her, Molly, you in danger, girl. That's how I felt about myself. Ivy, you in danger, girl. If you don't make some different decisions, this part of your life is going to be ruled by daddy issues. And so it is time to pull them big girl panties up, face what you need to face, deal what you need to deal with, confront your actions, confront those behaviors, confront those thoughts that are leading you to make the wrong decisions with this area of your life. So this is me talking to myself. And so with this realization, with me being ready to confront my daddy issues, I had to get to the space where I realized that my decisions were never about what someone else did. They were about what I chose. Come on here, somebody. As much as I wanted to blame my father for his role in daddy issues, at a certain point, I had to take accountability for my own actions. And I'm going to stop right there because I'm going to deal with that in next week's episode. So after I had these defining moments, what shifted for me? Or did anything shift for me and in my relationship with my dad? I will say that I was changing. He was not. I was ready to move forward. He was not. And like I just said, those realizations was more about me, not about him. And so I think sometimes, or actually all the time, when there's somebody else involved with your healing process, so whether it's someone who hurt you, someone who abused you, you really have to ask yourself, what do you want to come out of this confrontation? Because if your goal is to make someone else pay or to make someone else hurt like you hurt, I'm going to tell you it's never going to happen. That's going to be a futile confrontation if that is your goal. Nobody will ever hurt at the level that you hurt. Nobody will ever feel pain at the level of your pain. No one will ever be distressed at the level that you are distressed. It's just not going to happen. So if your goal is to get back at the person who hurt you, save it. I'm just going to save you the heartache, save you the pain, because you will be disappointed. And I just said all the syllables in that word. Let's talk a bit about the boundaries and emotional adjustments I had to make. Let me say it this way. Healing did not begin until I came to the point where I stopped expecting my dad to love me beyond his capacity. Let me say that again. Healing did not begin for me until I came to the point where I stopped expecting my dad to love me beyond his capacity. It was evident. Remember, we had all these conversations going back and forth, me confronting him, telling him what he did, telling him what he didn't do, having him make these empty promises, having him to, say that things were going to be different. And maybe they were different for a few weeks or a few months, but it always went back, to the original pattern. So I realized that there was something in him that could not deliver the dad that the little girl in me desired. The little girl in me wanted to reconcile the years she missed. The little girl in me wanted the dad that left me at 9. So I was a 40-year-old woman in age, but when it came to daddy issues, I was still 9. Because remember, my limb had been severed. My arm had been ripped. And if you listen to the previous episode, you know what I'm talking about. So I was expected to continue to function as though this trauma hadn't happened. So I still wanted my dad, but unfortunately, those years would never be reconciled. Sometimes when we deal with issues, we want the person to change, we want the situation to change, but in actuality, the change is required of us. And it's a hard pill to swallow, but it is truth. It is so true, ladies and gentlemen. So how did I get to where I am now? How did I get to the place where I am functioning in a place of healing and not in a place of bitterness and regret as it relates to my dad? Well, you'll have to wait till next week's episode to find out. This was awesome, guys. I invite you to engage with me. These episodes are so critical and so necessary. And some of you, may be harboring that little girl or that little boy that was abandoned by his or her father. And it's time to give the little girl and the little boy in you a voice. And I want to be your listening ear. So reach out to me. You can find me on Instagram at thepowderroom.pod. You can also DM me. I have a Facebook group page, The Powder Room Podcast. You can also email me at consultiva@gmail.com. I want to hear your stories. I want to hear, your reviews. I want to hear your constructive criticism. I want to hear what part of these episodes are touching you at your core. I want to hear what about these episodes are making you hold yourself accountable. I just want to hear from you. I want to hear from you. And please be sure that you join me next week, where the title will be Moving Beyond Daddy Issues: How to Live, Love, Thrive Beyond the Pain. This has been the Powder Room Podcast. I am your host, Ivy Ashley, and remember that we strive always to discover the message within our messes. Take care.